Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, after a decade of inaction by the Morrison and the Turnbull and the Abbott governments, we've seen a shocking skills shortage in crisis in regional Australia, and I see it every day on display in my electorate in South East Queensland. And when you cut $3 billion out of TAFE and training and skills, you're going to have a consequence, and it will be more in terms and worse in terms of the impact in regional Australia. So I thank the member for Mayo for raising this issue, because in her electorate she would see it, and I certainly see it in my electorate in the country towns that I represent. And the economy is being held back by the failure of the previous government. The lack of policy leadership and planning for the past 10 years has been astonishingly poor. You know, we've got a lack of skilled workers in regional areas, and I see it, for example, in areas of the meat industry, where I've got JBS at Dinmore, in Kilcoy Global Foods, up in Kilcoy, in the meat industry, or Cominion with Green Mountain. We see this all the time. These are skilled jobs that people want to engage in. So we need to take steps, and we need to take action as quick as we possibly can. And that's why I think the Albanese Labor government's commitment to more positions in terms of TAFE and training, and 465,000 free places at TAFE and 20,000 additional university places is so critical, I think, to address this area. But the Jobs and Skills Summit and Jobs and Skills Australia are absolutely crucial, and I commend the government for undertaking this. This should be high on our agenda, and it certainly is. And indeed, in my electorate, we're having a Jobs and Skills Summit as well in Blair, based in Ipswich. And I encourage people in the Chamber of Commerce, in the charitable sector and in other sectors, including in the faith-based sector, to engage themselves in this process as well. But we see a lot of discrimination, particularly in regional Australia, in terms of disability, First Nations people, people in the culturally and linguistically diverse background communities. So there are great barriers to labour participation in regional areas, and it's made worse by the characteristics of so many Australians who are coming from backgrounds where they are disadvantaged. The reality is we need to get rid of these barriers of discrimination against older Australians, people from these types of backgrounds as well. So business, government and unions have an important role to play. So arrangements in terms of supporting older Australians are really, really critical. I note the motion calls for opt-in scheme to increase income test thresholds for pensions for limited savings as an incentive to engage in paid work. Well, it's interesting that so far that only 3% of pensioners are actually taking up the advantage of the current work bonus concession. There is capacity for that in relation to pensioners working in my electorate and elsewhere. And I see the opposition of calling for the work bonus for pensioners to be doubled, despite the fact the coalition did nothing about it during 9 long years they had in office. And again and again we saw bills before this chamber where the coalition wanted to keep older Australians working longer because they could spend 5 years trying to raise, for example, the pension age to 70 years of age. The opposition should know, for example, that people who work in certain industries find it particularly hard. If you're working in certain trades or the police or military, they have high levels of work-related injuries, and they can't work for longer periods and have to retire earlier. We see this all the time. We acknowledge that recent increases in inflation and cost of living are a huge issue for older Australians. So we need to do more and better, and that's why Labor's Jobs and Skills Summit and why Jobs and Skills Australia is critical to identifying areas where there are shortages and to remove the barriers for older Australians, to remove the barriers for young people, remove the barriers for people in migrant communities. These things are really, really important, and we need to take steps to do it. I understand the sentiment of the member for Mayo. I understand where she's coming from, and this government is committed to removing those barriers. People living in regional Australia have worse health outcomes, have fewer job opportunities, and struggle with challenges that people who live in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane do not know and do not experience. So we need to do all that we can. One of the first actions of this particular government, which I commend, is allowing older Australians and people in regional communities to manage their money. That's why we're moving to abolish the Morrison government's privatised cashless debit card. It's really critical for regional Australia.
I thank the honourable member for Blair.